Joining me now, a man whose podcast I was on less than a week ago, the one and only Larry Wilmore. Hi, Larry. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, John.
So,
Deja vu all over you.
How have you been doing since I did your podcast 4 days ago?
How am I doing? Okay. I guess I'm all right. You know, I think I don't know. If we're talking about the.
It could be a light question. It can be a real question. That's really I leave it to you.
I'm doing fine, John.
It could just be banter that gets us into a
Yes,
conversation.
it's banter that gets us in.
The conversation could have already begun.
I like the banter that gets us in. I'm doing okay. I'm doing fine. Hanging in there is what I always like to say. Yeah.
So it is the first day of Black History Month. 2 big developments.
What?
Shout out Black History Month.
Yes.
Beyonce's ticket sale was announced, and the College Board capitulated to Jon DeSantis and have agreed to, in a technical term, defagify the AP Black History course.
Right. Yes.
To use a technical term.
Yes.
Why do you think the College Board is more afraid of Jon DeSantis than the vast majority of people who either don't care or just want politicians not involved in deciding curricula for students?
Well, he has the power to make it go away completely, I guess, right?
Right.
So I'm sure that's why they're bowing to him. It's just so ridiculous. The erasing of the black is the thing that makes me laugh, you know, in all different ways. But, you know, it's like an AP class. It's like extra credit, you know, which you have to kind of seek that out anyway. So I doubt that the people who are seeking that out are going to have roadblocks to finding out the information that they want. But it's just so cynical. It's the most cynical type of politicking, which, you know, we talk about that kind of stuff a lot, is going after those areas because they want to punish the woke, you know, own the libs, that type of thing. I think most of it comes from the fact that he wants to be president. He's going to run for president. And they want to be in that lane, you know, that Trump lane where they're owning the libs. And how better to own the libs than to not teach them everything about the role of racism in society. You know?
It is this
Because it's woke.
Because it's woke. Because it's woke. Well, it's interesting, right? Because it's like a woke fractal, right? Because deep down, it's a woke fractal. Because on some level, AP African American history is too woke to exist,
right?
But they know they can't say that, so they're like, let's attack the gay parts of Black history, the woke within the woke,
right?
And then it's like, you know what I mean? It's like it's woke. It's a layer of woke. You zoom in, and there's another woke layer beneath the wokeness.
I have to give them credit. That's pretty diabolical,
right?
Actually,
it's like they found something woke inside a woke thing to attack.
Very good, Ron DeSantis. Maybe he should be president.
Oh no!
Can we deal with China and Russia in the same way?
It's working. It's working. But there is this. I do wish we could find a way.
But it is crazy. I will say this. I don't want people to feel like that they're not going to be found. You know, that their histories and their stories won't be told. You know, if they're not in an AP class, trust me. I didn't have the internet. You know, I'm so old, right? Or something. No AP classes. I knew who James Baldwin was. I knew a lot of these stories. There will be different ways that people will hear stories, you know, and to hear these things. So let's not put all our eggs in the AP basket. I will say.
For sure. Well, I also will say, too, there's no group of people you're less likely to stop on their journey to figuring out that Ron DeSantis is full of shit than the kind of student who is going to sign up for AP African American history. Like, you lost them. They're too smart for you.
Yes.
You know, they're going to crack this one with whether you try to stop them or not.
It is an interesting point. Who's the target? You know.
Well, that's what I mean. It's like there's this. I've been thinking about this lately, which is that like it feels like whatever else is going on, the two political parties are always standing on the doorstep as you're going off as a kid to go to your first party.
Right.
And one party says have fun, and the other says bring a sweater.
Okay.
And sometimes the party that says bring a sweater is right, and sometimes the party that says bring a sweater is wrong. But you always like the parent that says have fun, and sometimes you're a little annoyed by the parent that says bring a sweater. And I think that there's an effort by Republicans to make Democrats the bring a sweater party. But when it comes to stuff like this, it's like
wait. I thought the other party was the black people are going to steal your sweater party. Sorry.
And be careful, right? The black people are going to steal your sweater.
Right.
But
sorry, I'm just the.
But when it comes to like Trump going after trans people or Ron DeSantis trying to change the specific curriculum, there's a kind of like leave us the fuck alone, just let people be that I think Democrats need to own, because a lot of this is just it is so like At what point do we think the governor of Florida ought to be focusing on something other than the specific lesson plan of a school class? Like, is he going to get into specific books? Is he going to get into like I don't know. I don't think we should have this this book by Bell Hooks on the curriculum.
Sure. That was a lot. Yeah,
it was a lot. I'm sorry.
No, it's true. What is it that you're actually fighting, and how do you fight things? I think are very important questions. Don't lose sight of certain things. I do think a lot of what's happening politically right now is performative rather than, let's say, strategic or really meant to do something constructive. So much of it is performative. And I think a lot of the performative nature of it is related to Trump. I think a lot of politicians had to act as if they're in the Trump camp in order to, it was their way of genuflecting to Trump to try to get his approval. And I think a lot of the virtue signaling is always put on the left, but it happens on the right all the time. Let's not fool ourselves. But most of the virtue signaling on the right is towards Trump and towards his gaze. Like there's this Trump gaze, which, I think is lessening now, but people still try to get, because it's the part of his base that is such a rabid base of voters, and there are certain issues to them that are so important that they thought Trump was the savior for those issues. And the left culture is one of those issues. They feel the left is taking their culture and has run all over it, with all this queer stuff and, trans bathrooms and all these things, and that they need guardians for that culture. So part of what Ron DeSantis does, he understands that, and that's what I mean by performative. When he's talking about the Don't Say Gay bill and this African-American studies and stuff, that's all saying, I'm protecting that culture that these motherfuckers are trying to steal from you, And I think sometimes the way the left fights it, I don't know if we always fight it in the right ways, because the left always goes by being smart, Yeah. And we're going to explain to you what this is. We have to break it down. Well, this is what it really means. Nigga, just fight a good fight. Why do you have to? You don't have to explain something. Just fight those motherfuckers. In the right way. So anyhow, I didn't say that very articulately, but I think you guys know what I'm talking about.
Well, I do think that what Ron DeSantis is like kind of is an evolution of Trump in that you're right. Trump was all performance, right?
Absolutely.
If you watch the speeches that Trump even gave in the last week, it is a complete fantasy of what his presidency was,
right.
But it's an enjoyable one, right? It's the idea that this president as deal maker came in, stopped all the left people and the woke people and the Jews. It's in there. Yes,
they guaranteed it's in there.
What they wouldn't give for it to be Fauci-stein, they want a fucking. They're so annoyed that he's Italian. They're so annoyed. They want him to be Jewish so fucking badly.
That's so true. I never thought about that.
Oh my God, it's unbelievable. It's radiating off of them. They don't want to do a firing squad on Fauci because he's not Jewish.
Yes.
If that makes sense,
right.
And it doesn't. But no, the point I was making.
Why does he have horns? I don't understand this.
There's an evolution that Ron DeSantis has done, which is he is as good at Trump at taking the national microphone by using the actual powers of a governorship.
Correct.
So it is a performance, but he's using his power.
Absolutely.
He's trying to ban the AP classes. He's doing Don't Say Gay. He's going after Disney. He's using his power and money as governor to kidnap people seeking asylum and shipping them to Martha's Vineyard. He's using his power to take the news cycle in the but with actual policies underneath it, with actual ramifications, which I think is something it's an evolution of Trump's sort of feral genius.
Yeah.
But I do think liberals don't totally understand how to fight back, because you're right, we do make this case to kind of explain that why what he's doing is wrong. And there was this, actually Ron DeSantis wasted taxpayer money sending migrants to Martha's Vineyard. And that's very true. He absolutely, of course, did. And it may even have been criminal.
Right.
But there's no okay, you can fight him on the facts, but what's the story we're telling that's not defensive but offensive, that makes him look bad, that makes him look weak, that puts him on the heels? And I don't think we have that.
No, it's true. In the critical race theory, the way that liberals fight it is they explain to you what critical race theory is, and your brain is like, no, stop explaining it. I can only take so much. It's like, or how about this? Stop fucking with black people in our history. Just say it like that. You don't have to explain it in those ways, or just make the conversation more of a practical conversation to achieve something, or what are the aims of it, as opposed to what it actually is, and those types of things.
Yeah, I do think also part of it is, I do think this effort to explain it actually also I think sometimes speaks to a lot of things small L liberals, people just that believe in liberal society, which does include a lot of Republicans, have just taken for granted. Like, we take for granted that everyone understands why democracy is a better system than a strongman system. We take for granted that people understand the purpose and value of education, including a fulsome history education that looks at the good and the bad. Hey. Oh, Pundit saying hi to Larry.
Oh,
that was cute.
Yeah.
Hey, Pundit.
Hey,
it's my fucking show. All right, we've talked about this. We've talked about this. But I do think that sometimes we don't ever say, like, why is it important that when we teach history, we teach the full explanation of what happened, not just the good, that history shouldn't just go from the founding to Martin Luther King to, like, Arthur Ashe, that there should be something in between.
God bless, I wish Arthur Ashe was in the teaching of it. I think a lot of it, here's the thing. I'm a writer. I love words. A lot of it is language, that can turn people off. Like, you say certain code words, and people just turn off, Like, when people say, Larry, do you believe in critical race theory? I go, no, there are too many critical race facts that are out there that I don't require a theory, Slavery, Jim Crow, the history of all those things, redlining. There's so many critical race facts before you even, why do we need a theory, for Christ's sakes,
Yeah.
There's so many facts that are out there, but also it's what you're going to do with it and that sort of thing. And I think if our conversations become more constructive, I just think it would be better rather than arguing over language and that kind of thing. Anyhow.
So a piece in New York Magazine looking at how DeSantis has exploited race and racism in his politics said, I am not calling DeSantis a racist. What I'm arguing instead is that DeSantis' political ambitions have entailed disempowering black citizens in his state and in a calculated fashions. Is that a distinction you find interesting?
See, with people like DeSantis and people of his ilk, I don't think it's a racial thing, as people say it. I think that's the means by which he's owning the libs. It really is left culture. That's really what it is, If that curriculum was all about black conservatism, I don't think he would have said a thing. If that was the whole curriculum, it was just black conservatism. We just want to have an AP course on the history of black conservatives. You don't own the libs by getting rid of that.
Yeah.
Yes, no?
No, I'm thinking about it. You're making me think about it.
Well, it really is. People have to understand there are certain things that I believe certainly are racial, or at least have racial underpinnings or even racial origins. That self-defense law that I think Florida has. I forgot the name of it.
Stand your ground.
Stand your ground. It's very problematic in many ways. But I think most of the things that Ron DeSantis does, as cynical as easy as it is to just say racism, well, race may be part of it, but there's a bigger thing.
Well, yes, but
not that there's a bigger thing than racial. Is not what I'm saying. But I would say there's a side thing that's going on here of what the actual story is.
Well, there's a reason.
It's a right and left story.
Well, yes, I think that's right, but I think there's a reason he targets AP African American Studies, and it's because you're right. It allows him to focus on the real enemy, which is the left and the kind of intellectual elite and the kind of the villains.
That's right.
But there is a through line here, which is it also signals to his base, right? That like I'm also taking on this culture that's telling you you're racist, that the country's racist, which is a way of saying, on some level, the people that are telling you that this country still has racial problems. Don't let that into your heart. You don't have to feel that. You don't have to believe that. That the problems that divide by race in this country are not born of injustice, but actually of the deep seated animosity and prejudices you carry in your heart.
We didn't do it. We weren't responsible.
Right, we weren't responsible.
Yeah. Now I think if we talk about grievance, I agree with that. Because grievance was the lane that Trump was in, especially with the one group in America that's not identity politics, and that's the working class white voter. Why that's not identity is beyond. Every other group is identity politics, but that one isn't. But I think that goes under the grievance issue, definitely, for sure.
So it's in that context that we're in the midst of another debate about police brutality, police violence. There was this video that was released of the murder of Tyree Nichols, and once again, there's, I think, the stirrings of a conversation in Washington about whether or not they can revive efforts to do some kind of bipartisan criminal justice reform, even though that feels really unlikely. I want to get to the kind of the way it impacts culture, but I just want to start with the kind of on the actual divide around the policy itself. Don Lemon interviewed Tyree Nichols' mother, and incredible strength to be doing interviews like this, seeking accountability, and doing it, in a just very, very brave person to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But what was striking to me in that conversation is midway through, she made a point of saying, there are good officers. I know good officers. And what my honest reaction to seeing that is, this is a person saying something that is to the right of what a lot of activists are saying. This person going through this unbelievable moment of grief. And it speaks to just how, I think, deep this divide is on the question of reform, which is, I think there's a more traditional view of what we need to do, and that is introduce a series of reforms, continue building on the reforms that have happened in the last few years. And then there is a progressive activism that says, how could you possibly reform a system which allows violence like this, brutality and inhumanity like this to exist? There's no reforming a system like that. How do you think about that divide? How do you think about it?
Yeah, that is a tough one. I mean, I understand the saying that not all cops are like that. Many people have to understand, part of the history of black people in this country is that, especially my father's generation, many of the only jobs that were available to them were civil service type jobs. So many blacks went into things like police, or my father was a probation officer. He went back to school and became a doctor later, but a lot of those areas were jobs that blacks could get. So in many areas of the black community, there's a deep respect for having those types of jobs, and they understand what those jobs are. Many of us have family members that work in those jobs. Doesn't mean that we also don't understand the relationship that black people have had with the police in general, and the upside down nature of the power dynamic in that relationship. That's why when a lot of these things happen, like George Floyd, like white people are surprised that something so brutal could happen, where black people are surprised that it was actually caught on video this time. Like that's the major difference, because we've heard these stories and everything, and part of, what's interesting about this Memphis thing is the fact, you have 5 black officers, police chief is black and everything. People don't know how to think about the racial element and all that stuff. But, in some ways, that's not such a bad thing, because it allows us to focus on another aspect of this. And you use the word, which I think a lot of times we miss out on, and that is brutality. And a lot of people forget about that. What we're watching is this show of brutality that is existing in our culture right now that we don't always see, but is there, Yeah. And you have to ask yourself, what is going on here? Why do they feel that they can exercise that level of brutality? Because the police, we acknowledge that sometimes police have to use deadly force. We may not like it, but we understand that sometimes that happens either to protect themselves or to protect society, to protect the people around in a certain area. Sometimes deadly force is needed, right? We may not always like that, but we understand why that may be needed. Deadly force was used on this kid, but what were they protecting? He was handcuffed. They weren't protecting themselves. They weren't protecting the society. So what were they protecting? They're protecting their egos. Okay? Some of them were bruised on their bodies, but all of them were bruised on their egos. And the price for bruising the ego of a pack of officers is brutality. Okay? So we have to ask ourselves, why do we allow that? Why is that happening? How do we reform these acts of brutality against citizens who obviously don't deserve that?
Yeah, and I do think too, I think sometimes there's some like nihilism that creeps in where people say, look, there were body cams and this happened anyway. But at the same time, we don't know how many instances of brutality were prevented because people knew they were being recorded. And also it is because we have video footage that these guys weren't indicted so quickly. But I do think that a lot of these reforms, body cams, going after qualified immunity, all these measures to seek accountability, they are downriver ways of addressing the upriver problem of the fact that there is a strain of this brutality, this sort of power, this power trip that happens that draws a certain kind of person to seek the job.
That's right.
And that is in some ways encouraged or inculcated in the training or in the experience of taking on the culture of being part of the police. And that's acute in these, quote, elite units that are sort of seen as less accountable and overpowered, but seems to be everywhere. And I do think that like it does that the racial element that the way in which this issue is rightly racialized, it speaks to how we were able to overlook it for so long because it was directed at people that the sort of the media didn't pay attention to in a broad way. But like how we like I think the next whatever reform looks like, how do we address that culture of inhumanity that seems to be so prevalent?
Yeah, that's a tough one because you're right. You know, the people who it was being perpetrated on, there was a low interest in terms of, you know, society stopping that. You know, if instead of that kid, if it was a young blonde white girl, what would the reaction be? You know, would that type of thing have happened? You know, why not? Why wouldn't it happen? If she resisted arrest, why not beat the shit out of her? Why not? You know, if you can't answer, if the answer isn't, yeah, we would have done the same to her. Okay, now we're getting to what the issue is. You know, you wouldn't have done the same to her. So why do you think you could do it to this person? Because his life is not valued in the same way that someone else's life would be, and that's just a fact. You know, and getting to the root of that isn't. I don't know if that's an easy thing. But starting with the brutality aspect, you know, that you're not allowed to have that behavior to anybody, you know, I think it's a good place to start. But man, I'm telling you, that history of that goes back a long ways, and there's a lot of limbs on that tree, you know, of where that's from. But I think people have just gotten away with it for so long that, you know, it's just an easy thing to do.
Yeah, it is.
And keep in mind, this unit, the Scorpion unit, whatever it was. Okay, here's the other side of it. So they're there, I think, to primarily fight the gang violence and that sort of thing. So the language of gang violence is brutality as well. You know, so some of it, if you're on the police side, you can kind of understand that that's the language that they trade in all the time. That's the language that's understood. There's a price to be paid for that, though.
Well, yeah,
there's a big price to be paid for agreeing to speak in that language. You know.
Yeah, well, it's the way in which living in a society that sort of accepts a level of daily mayhem that's beyond what we should accept allows for these kinds of problems to fester for so long. I mean, that is, I think, part of what makes this issue so hard. And I do think why a lot of activists and people that really focus and care about this issue land on this is not an institution that can be saved. Because this is not an example... I think because it became to public awareness, people act as though it's an issue that's gotten worse, as opposed to there has never been a time when the police weren't like this. We are just now finally seeing more of it and kind of understand it. Right. And it reminds me, and maybe this isn't, I'm not making a comparison of these issues in any way whatsoever, but it reminds me of our kind of inability to face what was actually going on in terms of sexual abuse in our institutions.
Sure.
That there was a realization because of coverage that sexual abuse was going on for a very long time in a lot of places, in churches, in schools, in institutions where adults were meant to be trusted, where they had the imprimatur of the state. And I think that's also what has in common with this issue. And then you go to say, well, how do we fix these institutions? How do we go back to a time when this wasn't happening? Well, it turns out this was always happening. And so what you need to do is accept the fact that from the very start, these institutions have mistreated and hurt people, and that's sort of part of the very fabric of their foundation. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to get rid of them, but it does mean you need to be honest about just how deep the rot goes. That there's no magical kind of period of time where this wasn't taking place.
I agree with that. I'd say I remember when the George Floyd thing happened, we were talking about, I was saying this to me is a virus that America's had for a while. I called it COVID-16-19 when it was going. Thank you very much for a little joke on a very horrible, tragic thing, everyone.
Thanks, Larry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm able to joke about anything is what I'm demonstrating.
That's why it's the best.
Yeah. But my larger point was you're absolutely right. You know, this sort of thing predates, America, predates all these things. But there's ways in which it manifests itself, which gets fine-tuned. You know,
Yes.
You know, like, the Holocaust was a fine-tuning of hate against one particular group. Terrible thing, but
We all agree on that.
hate has been around. Hate has been around forever, right? Hatred of Jews had a long run. It's been around forever.
Famously. That
Was like the worst form of it in recent memory that we can think of, something like that, and we can't act like it started with Mein Kampf, like the idea was born there. No. That anyone reading that book had confirmation bias when they were reading it, that were involved in that. So, So there you go. There's a happy thought for you guys.
One last question about this, which is, we're talking about how
Larry and Jon are talking about serious stuff. Love it or
yeah, look it up. People may leave it. Look, they may leave it.
Love it or cringe it.
Yeah, they may leave it. They may leave it, and that's
They
okay.
may leave it.
They may leave it.
They
That's
may
why it's
leave
in the
it.
name.
What are we gonna do?
Sometimes they leave it. Sometimes they love it. Sometimes they leave it.
You never know.
But they'll come back next week,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
So we're talking about
Probably.
this. Probably. So we're talking about this, and that this is not just about not just about sort of policies, but about this sort of culture. Into
Yeah,
that, we
definitely about culture.
we have
Yeah.
these sort of this new phenomenon of these videos, a countdown to the release of these videos. Do you see the release of a video of this heinous act against Tyre Nichols? Do you view it? How do you think about it? Is it valuable because it shocks the conscience? Is it less valuable because it desensitizes people to violence? Is it both?
I don't mind that type of thing. I mean, I think of the parents, that stuff has got to be really tough for them. Some people definitely need evidence. Like I said, I don't need video evidence to believe that kind of thing happened. I think the thing that's almost more valuable, and I apologize for these types of terms, in seeing something like that is, not so much the beating, but after the beating when they're coming up with their stories.
Look, we got him out the car. We was like, hey, bro, you good? Get the fuck out the car. Get the fuck out the fucking car. Damn, I didn't do anything. Hey, I didn't turn your ass around.
That to me is arguably even more valuable to see, which, by the way, is also an act of brutality. That's also an act of erasing someone's humanity, coming up with those stories of, he reached for the gun, he tried to hit you, that type of thing. That is almost uglier to me to see that type of thing happening than the beating itself, which is also horrific. So I think there is a value in seeing that not only this act of violence happened, but look what happens afterwards, because there are many times where if we didn't see the video of something, there'd be no way of knowing what could have happened, because the courts are certainly going to believe the police first. They're protected by their unions and that sort of thing, qualified immunity and stuff like that. It's very difficult without video, to know exactly what happened or to get to the truth of something.
Well, Larry, I know this is a heavy topic, but I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah.
But
John called me yesterday. Larry, can you come and do this? Yeah, I guess so. It's so heavy. No, but it's good.
Is that what my voice sounds like to you?
I'm glad we could
we
talk
had
about
like a
it.
nice serious chat, and then you just sort of you go. That's where you go with it.
Your dog came up and joined us. I thought that was
very
a great,
sweet.
a
That
nice
was
little
nice. We had a
moment.
nice little moment with the
That was
dog.
awesome.
You have a some sort of Champions hat on.
Yes, I got my Rams. Yeah.
Is that? And they're in it.
Well, I got to flex because we had such a horrible season this year, so I got to flex.
and have the teams that are in the Super Bowl been chosen?
Yes, they have, John. That would be the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs.
Kansas City.
Kansas City, correct.
How do they have the money for a team?
Well, there's a lot of people in what's called the middle of the country.
And where is that?
Okay, there's East Coast and West Coast, and then there's the thing that is the road to both East Coast and West Coast.
That's what's under the line when you go to the map on the plane.
Correct. And people like their football,
They do.
They like the football, they like the wings, they like the beer, they like their nachos and their onion rings.
And
Kansas City Chiefs are a legit team. They're really good. And Patrick Mahomes. We're going to have 2 black quarterbacks in the Super Bowl. It's pretty
that's
good.
cool.
Yeah. Right?
That's cool.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
And it's a very important position.
Very important. Yes. Very important position. You got that part right.
It's the host
John,
in a way.
good.
I think of it as the
It's
host
kind
of the
host.
team.
Yeah. Right. It is kind of the host. Yeah. He says, welcome to the game, everybody.
Yeah.
I'm going to be throwing some passes here in a few minutes, but first I'm going to bring out my offensive line.
Yeah. Those are guests in a way.
That'd be, well, not quite. John, you should watch a football game.
I've seen a football game. Your downs, your touches. I've seen them all.
Yeah.
I know how it works. If you get it far enough, it's first down. You start the whole thing over again. There's end zones. There's dances.
Cyclical. You're right. Yes.
There's dances.
Liberals over-explaining again. There you go.
I love it. Yeah. I think football's great.
It's
I
great.
hope everybody has a great time watching the Super Bowl whenever it is. Some Sunday coming up. Is
go.
it this Sunday?
All right.
Next Sunday?
Yes. Yeah.
On the same night?
That's right.
But they're still are they still doing a new Last of Us? I have something to watch.
Yes.
Larry Wilmore, thank you so much for taking the
Thank you,
time.
John. It's
I
my
always
pleasure.
appreciate getting to talk to
Thank
you.
you, guys.
Everybody, listen to Larry Wilmore, Black on the Air, wherever you get your podcasts. Yeah. He has incredible guests, including me. Thank you, Larry. Good to see you.